Okay, everyone. Here's the one that I'm the most excited to talk about. And after reading some of the comments of my students and some conversations I've had, I know some of them are looking forward to this bit. This is when I talk about my favorite superhero of all time. Whenever somebody asks me, who's your favorite superhero? I say this one immediately. Second place is Batman. Captain America, probably third. Beyond that, it all kind of gets mixed up. But my absolute favorite comic book character of all time is Spider-Man. I have loved Spider-Man as long as I can remember. My first introduction to Spidey is when I was a little kid and the old 1960s cartoon.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.
I wasn't a little kid in the 1960s, but they would repeat them on TV. I remember watching them. I remember watching them with my sister. I also remember he made some appearances on a kids' TV show called The Electric Company.
A rubber glove sandwich. Hard to bite, difficult to chew, and impossible to swallow.
I was always excited to see Spider-Man on that. Spider-Man, to me, when I was little, he was a real guy. I believed in him the same way that many kids believe in, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny. Spider-Man is real. And a little funny story about that. So in my mind, he was real. And they used to have, nowadays, up in Vallejo, they have, it's like Six Flags Marine World, correct me if I'm wrong. But when I was a kid, it was in a different location. I don't even remember where it was. But it was called Marine World Africa, USA. And I was probably about 5 years old. And I remember seeing advertisements for, come to Marine World. Spider-Man will be there. They had this whole boat show. And Spider-Man will be there. And they're like, get your picture taken with Spider-Man. And so me as a little kid, I, went to my parents. I'm like, I got to go to Marine World. I got to get my picture taken with Spider-Man. Really super excited about that. And of course, whatever, my parents to shut me up, I guess. We went to Marine World. Sure enough, I got my picture taken with Spider-Man, and I have lost that picture. I don't know where it went. I got some stuff stolen from me a while ago. I think it might have been in one of the bins that got stolen. But anyway, I still have the memories. Can't steal that from me. Anyway, I got my picture taken. It all happened so fast that I barely even remember it happening. And I think I was just so excited that I was just overwhelmed because, I got to meet Spider-Man. And to me, that was my evidence that Spider-Man was a real guy. Because, I met him. Hello? So I, would tell people that. And I remember telling my cousin, my older cousin, he's 6 years older than me, and he took it upon himself to break it to me that his friend's older brother dressed up as Spider-Man and worked at Marine World. So, not only did he say that Spider-Man was not a real guy, but he actually knew the guy who dressed up as Spider-Man. Little kid, I was 5 years old. Flash forward about 15 years. I'm 20 years old. I went to a comic book convention. This comic book convention was in Oakland. It was WonderCon in the early years of it, or relatively early years of it. And you could get your picture taken with Spider-Man and Storm from the X-Men as well. Get your picture taken with them. And so I'm like, oh, hell yes. Gonna go get my picture taken with Spider-Man. And so I walked up, got my picture. There's Spider-Man, there's Storm. And I said to Spider-Man, I said, hey, remember me? I got my picture taken with you when I was 5 years old. And Spider-Man looked at me and sort of back like that a little, and then said, yeah, you've gotten taller. See? He remembered me. How else do you explain that? You can't explain that. Spider-Man is real. My cousin doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He remembered me. And then years later, when my son was little, Spider-Man was at my local comic book store, Flying Colors Comics, and I asked him yet again if he remembered me. And guess what he did? So Spider-Man, he's a real guy. Don't let anyone tell you different. I've just proven it. Airtight. Tight. Anyway, here's the thing. Some guy named Stan Lee, whom I've met a few times. Again, I've talked about the great thing with comics is you often get to meet the people that, your heroes, your creative heroes. First time I met him, I was about, I think, 12, 13. He signed an issue of the Silver Surfer. I met him again when I was, I don't remember how many years, whatever. I was in my early 40s because my son was alive. I met him, and my wife was unable to come because she had jury duty to the signing. And this was at Flying Colors, my local store. She was unable to come. And my son, at that point, he was too little to even really understand who Stan Lee was. So, and I didn't want to have to stand in a long line with this little guy with me. I think he was like 3 or 4, something, or whatever. All the years are jumbling in my head now. But anyway, he was. I didn't want to have to stand in line and explain, oh, this is the guy who co-created Spider-Man. So I did the next best thing. I asked Stan if he could hold a picture of my wife and my son when I got my picture taken with him, and he seemed to get a real kick out of that. And the thing is, with meeting Stan Lee is, so many people have I've met Stan Lee, and everybody remembers their story of them meeting Stan Lee because he really went out of his way to make it special for everyone. Even though there were so many people in line waiting to meet him, he really makes an impression. Made an impression. And I was genuinely bummed when he passed away. Anyway, so with that said, so Stan Lee, claims he co-created Spider-Man, and he has a good story about that. So I'm gonna let Stan Lee hit it right here.
Nobody wanted me to do it. My publisher, when I suggested the idea, he said, that's the worst thing I ever heard of.
Why?
People hate spiders. You can't call a hero Spider-Man. When I said I wanted him to be a teenager, that's where he started, he said to me, you don't understand, Stan. A teenager can only be a sidekick. He can't be the hero.
Robin.
Then when I said I want him to have a lot of personal problems and nothing ever goes right for him, he said, Stan, don't you know what a hero is? So he wouldn't let me do it. I had to wait till later. We had a book we were going to drop, and when you do the last issue of a book, nobody
cares. You call
cares.
them books, right?
Well, I call it a comic book, yeah. Nobody cares what you put into it, so I featured Spider-Man on the cover. And I forgot about it. Well, a month later, the sales figures came in. It had been our biggest seller. So my publisher came to me and said, Stan, do you remember that character that we both liked so much, Spider-Man? Why don't you do a series? And that's how it happened.
Who came up with the way he looks?
Steve Ditko. Steve designed the character.
The colors?
Everything about the costume.
And there you go. So this is a character that, as he says, went against all the expectations, but he was hugely popular. And the basic story, if you know him, if you saw the original Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, that is super, super close to the way it happened in the comics. He gains his power and he gets bitten by a radioactive spider. His first instinct isn't, I need to go out and use these powers to benefit humanity. His instinct is to become famous, to become wealthy, make some money off of this. He does that, and he gets rather full of himself, and he lets a criminal run past him when he can easily stop him. And the police officer is like, hey, all you had to do was just hold him or trip him or something. And, he just says to this police officer, I'm tired of being pushed around. From now on, I look out for number one. That means me. Because he was a kid who was constantly pushed around, and then he gets a bit of power, and it gets to his head. And he loses sight of, what's important in life because of all this power. And then, of course, later that same burglar runs, gets away and winds up killing Peter's Uncle Ben, the man who raised him, along with his wife, Aunt May, and or Peter's Aunt May, Ben's wife. Anyway, you can get it. And then he goes after the guy, and then when that moment of realization that, this is the guy that I let run past me, is absolutely, it's just such a great moment. And then, of course, that famous line that he learns, and even if you just know Spider-Man from the movies, this line is either said specifically or indirectly or paraphrased with great power must come great responsibility. And this is, this goes beyond superheroes. Whenever you have some amount of power, you do have a responsibility. At least that's how it should be. And I wish that everyone who did have a degree of power didn't look at it as, oh, hey, I can use this to benefit myself, but I have a responsibility because I have what others do not. And in a way, Spider-Man, he is almost like one of the tragic heroes, that Shakespeare did quite a bit with, made his name with. It's not exactly the same because he's not tragic in the sense that, I suppose you could tell the story of his death, but he's like the tragic heroes in the sense that he is driven by an obsession. And it's his best and worst quality, that this sense of power and responsibility, that he never wants somebody else to suffer because of his inaction. And this is what makes him heroic, but it's also what makes his life absolutely miserable. Now, obviously, the best source for this is, of course, the comic books. Those original, if you just read the original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko issues, that really gives you all you need to know. Don't get me wrong, there have been a lot of other great Spider-Man comics since then, but it really captures how difficult his life becomes, juggling these two sides of his life as Peter Parker and his life as Spider-Man. So it's his best quality, but it also it dooms him in many ways. As for the movies, the one with Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man 2, does a really great job. Don't get me wrong, I know some of you guys, big Tom Holland fans, maybe there's even some Andrew Garfield. I really love the Tom Holland movies as well. I think he is the most like the character when he's in the suit and his personality. Overall, he is my favorite Spider-Man. However, that one with Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man 2, I think that one does the best job of showing how difficult his life is and this struggle between his two personalities. And that's what's always been great about Spider-Man, is you can relate to him. He has, problems with money, problems with his dating life, his love life. There's a great issue where he's just struggling with a cold, and he's trying, gets his head handed to him by one of the villains. He's relatable. He's so much like one of us. And I imagine there might be some fans out there of Into the Spider-Verse, where it feels recent to me, but it's been a while now since they've introduced in the comics Miles Morales. And I love Miles. I love what they've done with him. The great thing with Spider-Man, and these aren't my words, I've heard other people say, that unlike Superman, who doesn't even wear a mask, or Batman, who still shows this part of his face, you don't see any of his face. So anybody, whether they're white, they're black, brown, whatever, you could see Spider-Man and imagine yourself under that costume. And that's kind of the initial, the beginning point for Miles Morales. Why not have an African-American, well, he's African-American and he's Latino, biracial young man be Spider-Man? And the core concept still works. He's a different character for a more modern age. I love the fact that my son, his favorite Spider-Man is Miles Morales. To be truthful, he really likes Peter Parker, Spider-Ham, but that's just his personality. But of the human Spider-Man, he likes Miles Morales. And I imagine there's a whole new audience out there. And to me, even though he is a different character, he still has all the things that are important about Spider-Man. And I love the fact that there are, it just appeals to even more people, and more people can see themselves in him. And of course, there's the Spider-Gwen character. If you've seen the movie, she's in the comics as well. I want everybody to be able to appreciate and have this same love for this character that I do, and I know that many people do. And again, I'm as long as I can remember, as an adult, I love Spider-Man. He is my favorite fictional character, hands down. I'm always keeping track of his adventures, and I look forward to seeing more comics, more movies, more Spider everything.
Spider-Man, where are you coming from, Spider-Man? Nobody knows who you